Welcome back to the Fraudology podcast. Well, today I get to talk with someone who I have known for several years and have wanted on the podcast for a while. It just hasn't worked out, but now it does work out. So I'm really excited to have Mark Porteous on the podcast today. He is a longtime leader in the e-commerce fraud space, specializing in marketplaces. Very few people know marketplace fraud the way Mark does. And we're going to talk about that today, specifically how market volatility impacts abuse and fraud in marketplaces. And I think even if you don't work for a marketplace, you're going to find this really fascinating because there's some real world examples that we can give that are current and in the headlines that will explain exactly what we're talking about. So with all of that, welcome to Fraudology, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this.
So you're right. It's been a long time coming, but happy to be here now. Excited to talk about the topics.
Yeah. So I ask this question to everyone when we start out because everybody's answer is different. How did you get started in fraud prevention?
Yeah, you're right. Everybody does take a different road. What I've found in kind of my conversations, interestingly enough, is that a fair amount of us have similar stories, but you're right, all of them have a little bit different tweaks. So I've been the last 9 years I've been working for StockX marketplace, specializing in current culture goods, sneakers and streetwear, things like that. And I got started with them in 2017 as a customer support agent. And there were 56 of us at the company at the time, and there was no fraud department. And so what we had was it all getting worked through CS. And, this customer support team handled chargebacks, and again, without there being a fraud team, mostly just hearing about it, in different ways and seeing it. And after a little bit, I started diving into fraud a little bit more from that front, and finding a couple of fraud rings along the way. And so our CEO at the time and our COO at the time asked me to spend a little bit more time on that. And so I did a pretty deep dive, came back with them with the findings, and they were like, great, we'll have you start building out a team related to this now that you know what it looks like. And so they had me just kind of transition out from CS to building out our fraud team kind of ground up. And so I started on there, and with chargebacks and buyer fraud and some of the seller fraud aspects, and was building it up from there. And then they brought in Travis Dawson, who a lot of people that watch this will know, and he kind of helped mentor me on the fraud industry as a whole. And from there we built out a pretty strong fraud program and trust program, and focusing in on buyer fraud, seller fraud, identity, chargebacks, the whole nine.
And something that I have learned about two-sided marketplaces that do deal in like current culture goods, because there's a few of them. I think the biggest one that everyone thinks of from 15, 20 years ago is eBay, right? I think of like the Beanie Babies back in the day when eBay was just starting, and how, all of a sudden the pricing would go up and the value would go up, and then this would go down, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But something I've noticed about those of you that work for those companies is you guys are really on the front line of probably some of the most sophisticated fraud. I think you guys in crypto and money transfer are really who see fraud on the front lines, new tactics, and the sophisticated guys that do this for a living that have resources.
Yeah, I think marketplaces especially are unique because there's different aspects about them, right? So like you could have a two-sided marketplace where you've got buyers and sellers. You can have multi-sided, such as some of the like on-demand delivery, right? Where maybe you've got a restaurant that is, going to be providing the goods, but there's an identity component to that because there's aspects of people that will try to create fake storefronts just to, like, then you have, a buyer on the other side who's expecting an item delivered to them. But there's also the aspect of, like anything else, is there buyer fraud there? Is there credit card fraud? All the normal aspects that we have related to that. Is the person on the other end, again, identity comes in from the aspect of, is the person on the other end legitimate? Or would the third aspect, a driver or a delivery person, a courier, right, walking into something that's concerning? Additionally, there's a fraud and identity aspect related to that courier. Are they legitimate? Do we know who it is? Who is the company trusting with that? And so with all of those different aspects working along the way, it creates these multiple different areas of, fraud exposure. And so it does make it a little bit more interesting related to the marketplace aspects with how many vectors there are, and really how, I'd say, forged in identity verification they all are, because it really comes back to you and your team needing to know who you're dealing with at every step along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's kind of brings me in. I mean, you've answered this a little bit, but um, like I mentioned before, like every vertical within e-commerce has its own kind of flavor of fraud and abuse related issues. But there are several kinds of marketplaces. You kind of talked about a couple, but can you dive into, you know, uh, some of the issues that they pose, and can you talk about them?
Sure. So we talked a little bit about buyer fraud,
Yep.
seller fraud. Additionally, there's the aspects of collusion, right? What happens when you are in a situation where multiple sides of a transaction are working in tandem to, try to pull off something that's just completely unexpected. And again, that's where you want to make sure that you know who you're dealing with on each side. But again, collusion makes a unique opportunity, because it might very well be, Mark Porteous, and may very well be Carice as them. But if they're working in tandem again, and an order is not as expected, it's way outside of the norm of a price or volume, value, things like that. It can make things difficult. Additionally, there's major market volatility events. Again, some of these items, when you're dealing with marketplaces, it's not the price of a company that is setting. It might be marketplace pricing that's happening, and kind of dynamic pricing that's happening, or just the market setting it. And so one of the and some of those produce some of the more challenging things. And I'm wearing the U.S. national team shirt today. Today's game day against Bosnia, and so like I'm in World Cup fever right now. And one of the things I've been watching very closely over the last few weeks has actually been the challenges that our friends on the ticketing marketplaces are dealing with right now. Because again, this is a major sport and a major event that's happening in North America, and it only comes around every 4 years, and so there's just a lot of eyes on it, and there's a lot of things going on, and things with the ticketing marketplace can change and fluctuate so much, and those create such unique problems. And again, there's from when you think about it from like the buyer side, you've got people that are all over the globe coming to North America right now for these matches. And so let's say I'm going on to one of the ticketing marketplaces because I need to buy the tickets for my next event. Well, I'm going to be coming in with, say, a German billing address and a device that's got, device info that totally tracks back to Germany, and my IP history is all in Germany, but now I'm in the States, or I'm in Mexico, or I'm in Canada, and I'm trying to get items from there. That's going to look a little odd, right? And so you've got to be mindful of that and not hitting false declines as it relates to the buy side. But then again, you also got people who are going to be using that situation and these tickets going up in value to try to buy fraudulently. So it makes it difficult as you're tuning the models to make sure you're hitting correctly on that. And then additionally, on the sell side, you run into really unique examples and issues, because from the sell side in these aspects, you have everything from straight up fake sellers who are trying to pose like they have tickets and just get the money and then try to ghost, but never had the tickets. All of the aspects that you need to do with identity verification for, ensuring that sellers are legitimate in these marketplaces. But then these volatility events, they bring in fraudulent actors because of their values, but then there's also the policy related things, and that's been some of the more kind of high profile things that some of these ticket marketplaces have been dealing with over these last few weeks. Because let's take the US for example. I was out in Los Angeles for their home opener against Paraguay, and tickets were initially very expensive, related to how FIFA released them with their dynamic pricing, which I could go on about, but we'll save that for another time. But there was their release, and then tickets actually went down in value on the secondary market. And so, you've got them kind of coming down for a point, and then before the match, they started to go back up. I know because I was watching very closely. Started to go back up, and then the U.S. has this blinding performance, wins big, and now it starts hitting fever pitch. And I was watching the pricing for the next match in Seattle, and the order average for the Seattle tickets skyrocketed after the U.S. won. So when that happens, you've got this unique position where, okay, I bought, let's say, I bought for some of the tickets around that time were, I want to say, in the $1,700 a pop range, and then they surged up to $2,500 a pop. And some of the ticket marketplaces don't require immediate ticket fulfillment, and so I might be a seller and having sold those, and now I still have them in my possession. I see that they're up, say 1,000 or more a pop. That puts
because the US won their game, right? So pre-game, they're, maybe 1,700, but then once the US won, then all of a sudden that price goes way up because the demand goes up. And now, I don't know what exactly it was, but that there's usually some kind of event that happens, right? Whether it's some YouTube influencer with the little boo-boos, or, a sneaker release, or ticket, concert tickets, maybe the artist has announced it's their last tour after the tickets have been purchased. There's usually some kind of event that occurs outside of the marketplace that impacts the price going way up, right?
Yeah, if you find, it could be any one of those. It could be any sort of event, and if it happens in between the point of sale versus fulfillment, now it presents a situation where maybe the seller doesn't want to fulfill. And, they look at it from the perspective of, all right, well, I'm going to say I don't have these, I'm going to not fulfill, and then I'm going to take my chances, and I'm going to resell them again for more. And a lot of marketplaces have mechanics in place to try to hold accountability for that. Usually it's in the form of a fee, but for the sellers, sometimes it's a math problem, right? Like my fee might be X, but my next sale is Y. I'll take that difference. And so it's important for us in what we do to, really be focused in also with our teams related to the policy aspect of what we do. Because a lot of people think policy abuse related to returns and a lot of things that happen on the buy side, and that's totally normal because there's a lot more that's happening on that front. But from marketplace perspective, it's not just thinking about it from that perspective. We have to think about it from the sell side as well, and what happens on that end, and make sure that we do have strong policies in place, as well as reporting and intelligence to be able to look for scenarios where did a seller commit to selling a ticket, say at price X, didn't fulfill, sold again, same items at price Y. Okay, well that should flag, and then accountability needs to happen on there. And it's important to balance out. A lot of places will be thinking a lot about the seller specifically and making sure they got the supply as well. They should, but it's important to be holding accountability and making sure to do right by the buyers in these situations,
Yeah.
because a lot of what's happening, like I'm seeing in some of these stories that are out there, somebody flies to Seattle because they believe that they've got tickets that they purchased at say $1,500 a pop. But then now they find out after they're in Seattle with their hotel and all the other stuff that, sorry, you're not getting the tickets. Here's your refund. You can repurchase at $2,700 a pop. And
Right.
like that's a really tough thing to be putting somebody in the position of making, and it just erodes trust. Uh,
Mhm.
and like brand trust takes years to really build up with people, but in high profile events such as big releases or events like the World Cup that don't come around that often, and people really plan for it. If your policies aren't strong and your identity mechanics aren't strong, you can find yourself having trust get eroded with your consumers very, very fast, and have them running to your competition, which is the worst case scenario. So those aspects really are huge. And again, right now is just you know, a a really prime example of it, with the cup being in North America, and just the way that, again, pricing from the very beginning has happened. This has been by far, tickets for this World Cup have been by far the most expensive that we've ever seen in world football and soccer. So it's been really interesting to see. And then um, kind of on the flip side to that, the U.S. again, they play today. I thought about flying out to San Francisco for the match, decided not to. But I was watching tickets pricing for a long time. Part of the reason I decided not to was ticket prices when I was looking at were like, get in was somewhere around $2,900 a pop, and like that's
Wow.
crazy to me. And so
Mhm.
never mind, not going to do it. But over the last couple of days, it has really dropped down. We're talking like 1,700 a pop. And so again, now if you think about the flip side to that, if I bought, say, a week ago, or
Mhm.
whatever, and I paid $3,000 for my tickets, and they haven't been fulfilled, or maybe they have been filled, maybe I haven't, but I see that they're actually valued at 1,500 now. There is part of me that's absolutely going to be considering charging that back, and oh, it wasn't me. It's claiming the fraud stuff, all the friendly things that we as merchants have dealt with on the chargeback side.
Yeah.
So these
And then
volatile.
buying them again for the 1,700 and still getting to go to the game.
Exactly. Like, playing doing the whole run with the card company, that, however someone might buy their items, and trying to run through whatever I can do, taking it to pre-arb, going the whole nine to see if I can get my money back, but then buying for a lower price. So, you know, uh, in the marketplace side, the intelligence aspect of it is really crucial, to make sure that you see the full story, because maybe you take action against the person and then they raise holy hell on whatever social media platform, and somebody says to you, hey, I see this person, they say they filed a chargeback and now this action's happened. They've been a good buyer, whatever. Sure, that's that side, but you need to have the intelligence to be able to say, yes, they bought from us at 3 grand, filed a chargeback, took it the distance, got the money, and then repurchased at 1,500, right? Like, how do we want that to be normal activity on our platform? And
Yeah.
so again, it's just these volatility events create all of these different problems that exist, that require strong policy to be put in place, strong intelligence on how you identify these, and then how you put together the story for defenses along the way. So again, it's a really interesting aspect, and this is such an interesting time for how it's playing out. And again, like, places see this over the course of, if it's a Super Bowl or something, you're talking about like one event. The interesting thing about the World Cup is that this is, a month or so long, and you got customers from all over the globe. It's spanning 3 different countries. And so it's just a really unique experience as it's related to this, but it is creating a lot of vectors that can be exploited, or be open to fraudulent scenarios, or abusive scenarios.
Right. And a lot of times when these, volatility events occur, there's not a lot of warning. You don't get a heads up, right? That's kind of defeats the purpose. And so that's why it's so important. I just want to highlight what you were saying. That's why it's so important to have strong policies in place, and to have that intelligence already coming in, and to, have the identity piece really zoomed in as well. All of those pieces together, because it's just going to happen real quick, and you're going to get, your senior leadership team going, wait, we're in the headlines. There's a bunch of Twitter or X or whatever they are threads about us, like, and when you were talking about just brand trust and how quickly it can be eroded, it reminded me of a phrase I remember somebody in trust and safety sharing with me once, that trust is earned in drops but lost in buckets. And that's super true when it comes to marketplaces. I think because a lot of times the marketplace itself, the company itself, isn't the one fulfilling the items most of the time. So you have to have a lot of trust that the person who is the seller on that platform actually has the merchandise that they say they have, and that they're going to give it to you. You have to trust in that marketplace brand in order to do that. And if that is gone, or if you start to see people playing games, and they're allowed to postpone fulfillment until after the USA game to see how it shakes out, or they're allowed to do things like that, then that's what's going to happen. The brand trust goes away, and when brand trust goes away, then the company profits go away.
Yeah, and as you talked about, you're right. The volatility events can happen at any time, and they are relatively. Some of them can come out of nowhere. Some of them are a little bit more predictable, right? Like this run so far against take the World Cup, or March Madness. Some of these events that it can happen over a longer period of time, you can kind of anticipate when some of these will happen, and know what to do about those. Again, like this World Cup is a little bit interesting because everything has just been so high priced with it. And it's breaking all sorts of records on different things, and it's one of those aspects of, as I mentioned, you need to have good policy in place, and good on both sides, on what's going to happen if a seller can't fulfill, related to the seller. What's going to happen for a buyer if a seller can't fulfill? And it's usually a question of, do you give a refund, or do you source it? Marketplaces usually will, have an aspect where they might be able to source other items. And that's clearly what, these buyers related to these ticket things, that's what they're looking for, right? Like, purchased 100 level tickets to the Seattle, the match in Seattle, and that's what I expect. And so if the seller can't fulfill, I expect somebody to, be able to source me 100 level tickets. But if the price goes up, then the business starts finding themselves in a situation where they're gonna start making decisions on it. And what I've found in my time is it's important for us as, on the side that we sit on as the merchants to have good playbooks in place for it. Because again, you can't predict every one of them, but you can put into place a playbook that will help guide along the way of what to do, as well as like, this has happened. Here's how we identify it. Here's who we notify. Here's how we present who's going to be making the decisions along the way at certain, whether it's dollar thresholds or whether it's volume thresholds or how viral something's got, whatever the case might be, making sure to have understandings of here's who's getting involved along the way, and here's how we come up with decisions to make, and how we're going to treat those. And then again, with these playbooks, you can start working that in with different leadership levels of what are going to be the decisions made on what we're going to do, how we're going to treat customers along the way, not treat customers, that's not the word I'm looking for here, how we're going to handle customer complaints along the way, or not customer issues, right? It could be totally different things along the way. And so it is very smart, and kind of the way I always approached it was, let's build these playbooks along for scenarios that can be dropped in to most situations with slight tweaks along the way. That makes it so much easier than like, oh my gosh, this is happening, the sky's falling. That the thing scene from The Office where everyone's running around, like trying to find the like. So it just makes it so that you can have a playbook in place, a quarterback driving it, a coach making decisions. Like it just helps organize along the way and turn these really volatile situations into something that can be controlled better.
Right. And you mentioned a little bit around buyer chargebacks, but another part of, market volatility is that, there's going to be more fraud as well on the buyer side if the demand and the price for those tickets go up, right? So you've also got, people trying to use stolen credit cards to purchase, because I don't want to pay for those $3,000 tickets, but I'll steal somebody else's credit card and use it to buy them. Or they're so they can file chargebacks for different reasons, right? There's strictly fraud. There's also the friendly fraud reasons or first party fraud reasons that you mentioned before, where, hey, I bought the tickets for $3,500 and now they're $2,000. I'm not paying that difference. I'm just gonna, call my bank, say I didn't do it, and then repurchase. Yeah, so there's a lot of things. We talked a little bit about the seller impacts, but I wanted to dive in a little bit on the buyer impacts as well when it comes to fraud.
Yeah, with these with these volatility events, whether it's tickets or it's products, whatever the item might be, right? Like
Mhm.
in the sneaker space, maybe somebody wears a pair of shoes at halftime of the Super Bowl that
Mm.
no one's seen before, and then bang, like they're
Mhm.
charts, right? So like in these volatility events that can happen out of nowhere, really what you want to make sure you have is a strong process in place. If you're using a fraud vendor to, review your purchases, make sure you really understand with them the, strategy around your approval rates, and both like what is your expected, but then what can happen, and, understanding and digging in with them the aspects of the behavior and how you want them to perform, and making sure that you or your teams are mindful and staying with your vendors closely to dive in, or like to fine tune that strategy, looking at examples where there was a false decline, and talking to the vendor about why that should have been allowed. Vice versa, work with them on the aspects of things that were approved but then came in as chargebacks, and working together on understanding those things so that the tuning can be done, um, and then also working with them on when things start going unexpected and volume is way up or price is way up. Most of them will start having alerts that will start showing up, understand what is the course of action when alerts start going off for them, as well as, like, if you as a merchant should have very similar reporting to understand if things start going outside of the norm. If you think, like, here's a high bar of what order volume or order value looks like, here's a low bar, most of the transactions are going to be happening somewhere in here. Do you have intelligence and reporting that will show when something starts going right here or something falls off right here? And working in with your partners along the way, or your own teams, if this is all internally built, which is very common, as well as working through with the teams to fine tune what is expected there and make sure that there's good alerting in place to identify that, so that you can understand, like, is this collusion? Is something going up the charts, or in the wrong direction because it's total market manipulation? Or did something just happen that is creating real demand or a real sell-off, and that's just normal market mechanics happening in the wild, and need to be allowed to perform? And it's, again, those are things like I tell anybody that talks to me about, like, hey, what did you do with your approval rate strategy? How do you go about it? It's just, don't leave it on autopilot. Make sure to be very involved with the strategy on that, and understanding how, if you're using a partner, they are approaching it and how they are seeing it for your business. And if you're doing it yourself or with a data analytics team, making sure that, again, it's not on autopilot. You understand what's happening there, so that you can really help impact and tune the strategy along the way.
Well, and the type of vendor that you use is going to impact your authorizations as well, right? Like whether that vendor is on the hook for the chargeback or not, for example. If all of a sudden your AOV skyrockets, still using this, FIFA example, if all of a sudden, typically your tickets go for, maybe around $1,000 for two or something like that, and all of a sudden now it's 3 grand. If you have a provider that takes on the chargeback risk, they might be inclined to think that those are really risky, because those are going to look at first like outliers to them, and they're, not going to want to approve them. But if you have, one of the build your own, so to speak, or the fraud vendors that don't take on the chargeback liability, they might be a little more lax about that because it's not on their end, but you want to be, aware of those things, and you want to be a little more vigilant when there's higher dollar or higher risk. So it's that consistent balance of, I hear you saying this too, but just highlighting it, it's that consistent balance of managing your approval rate with also making sure that the risky transactions, where identity isn't, able to be verified, where cards are stolen, that those are getting declined.
Yeah, it's and that's kind of the point I'm making, on be involved in your strategy and understand, working with a vendor, what's their strategy, how are they going upon it? Because you're right, conventional thought is, if you're using a vendor that is ensuring chargebacks, when there's high purchases or high volume, they're going to be more inclined to start declining soon. And there's certainly examples of that are out there. But if you work with your vendor, like, understanding that strategy, you can really help put in place aspects to not start the auto declining so fast, if there's ways to be in touch about what's happening, and allowing a little bit of a runway. Again, this requires two-way street. It requires the vendor to have faith in you as the, person running the strategy on the merchant end, and it requires you to have trust in your vendor that they're, going to know that you will be responsive and you are, looking out for their interests as well to ensure that things don't just get out of control for the sake of bringing in more revenue. But, what you'll see with those is, if things start getting decline faster, it's because there's skin in the game for them as well, and that helps kind of keep you from not going, into one of the programs as fast. This is like, again, the conventional thought on, say, uninsured would be like, hey, you're going to have more volume in there, and that some of these higher value orders might be getting through easier because there's not the exposure there for the vendor. But then maybe if these are fraudulent and this is not a legitimate case, more start getting through faster. It's not critical to start bringing that in because the skin in the game is not there, and then maybe you find yourself in the program. So again, like, those are two different schools of thoughts. I've seen them both. I've been on them both. I got thoughts on those, but really it's I don't see as, I look at it from the perspective of everybody has to assess what their business is and what they've got that they're bringing to the market, and then understanding which of those works for them. And then again, working with the company or the vendor to understand their strategy as well as yours, and which ones line up better with yours, and who you can create a better working relationship with, who you have more trust with. Again, it's similar to what we were talking about with the marketplace aspects. It's about brand trust and company trust. Who do you believe can deliver on what your strategy is, and not just, here's how we treat fraud prevention and we will bucket you in with everybody else and you'll be just, a peg or a spoke in the wheel. It's making sure that you fit in with them and can create that trust and accountability to be there when things are going well. And then when things start getting a little shaky, understanding that problems always happen. This is why we're in this space.
Right.
It's always there, is that it will be there, but understanding that when things start going awry, it's you can work through to get to good outcomes on the other side.
Right. Right. And I think that one thing that you said there, as far as building that trust with your vendor, is communication, right? Like, as soon as like, another example came to me with when Kobe Bryant passed away, right? Like, all of a sudden, all of his merchandise, went up in value very quickly on the secondary market. I remember we were out to brunch with friends when we got the news, and one of my friends kind of dabbled in reselling on a couple different marketplaces, and she was like, quick, I need to buy some Kobe shoes so I can for cheap now, because the stores haven't figured it out yet, and then sell it on so there's so many different examples of that. But picking up the phone and calling your vendor and saying, hey, this is probably what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. We're going to see a lot more volume. We're going to see higher dollars than we're used to. Just be aware that you can expect that. And we've got this playbook. We've talked this through before. We've talked through this instance before. Here's what we're going to do. And you have your internal playbook, and then you have your external playbook too with your vendors, and, making sure that they're aware of your business model. And to your point, that you're not just being, put into a cookie cutter, because marketplaces especially are so unique for so many reasons. You mentioned at the top of the episode, there's one-sided marketplaces, there's two-sided market. Well, one-sided marketplace, I guess, would be traditional e-commerce, but two-sided marketplaces, there's three-sided marketplaces, there's, all these different ones, and they have so many different players and just different flavors of issues, right? Different types of ways to abuse policies, different types of ways to steal from the company in different ways. So having your vendor and, your company understand, hey, we're a two-sided marketplace, but we fulfill our own products. We have less risk than if our sellers fulfilled their product, for example, right? The traditionally marketplaces that fulfill their own, or traditionally marketplaces that have their sellers fulfill the goods, or like food delivery with restaurants, right? Like you're counting on that restaurant to make that meal and have it ready for a delivery driver to pick that up and take it to the buyer. You've got three different players and none of them actually work for the marketplace. So, you need to verify. That's where identity comes into play. That's where looking at, their past behavior to understand, what their future behavior is going to be. Do they have a history of, 2,000 orders fulfilled and, the buyers have been fine with everything they've shipped? Or is this a brand new seller that's claiming to have something really rare? That might be a little bit more suspicious.
Absolutely. And you called out one of the examples of a volatility event that I know well, and they happen, right? As I mentioned, they happen. It's all about just making sure that you've got the playbook in place. And again, they're not unique to marketplaces, right? Like, think about somewhere around uh 2019, 2020, e-commerce places suddenly, like, you might have seen toilet paper and paper towels, masks, and all the stuff that was just being emptied from the shelves. Like, it's all any one of the big box retailers, right? They're all empty now, and so then everybody's running online. You might be sitting there and your reporting shows like, how did we just get a few thousand orders of masks or again toilet? Good example, right? Like that was one of the first things I remember walking along the stores being, all right, completely cleared out. So unexpected events, they happen to e-commerce, they happen to marketplaces. They're not unique to just one area. And so that's why it's important to do the playbooks, right? And to make sure that you've got these really detailed and important aspects of understanding what are you going to do in these scenarios to ensure that they're not just, oh my gosh, we have no idea what to do here. Again, they might be slightly different in each case, but you set in place these playbooks, these policies, these things that can be used as guides to help make decisions fast. Because if there's one thing that volatility events show, is that you do need to be in a position to make decisions quick. And so that's why it's important to have these in place so that you can be guided to make good decisions, and so that you make these playbooks in I'll call them peacetime, where something's not happening right now, so that in wartime, when things are going very fast, you're not making decisions out of emotion and just with like whatever hits your brain first. You've actually thought about some of these scenarios and have something to help guide along the way.
Yeah, going back to your, 2020 example, just really quickly with toilet paper, I think there's a difference there when it comes from an e-commerce site or a retailer, and that is that the price can't go up because then there's things like price gouging laws and things like that, right? But on secondary markets, there's really it's fair game, right? So if somebody was selling toilet paper on eBay, for example, they could mark that up for as much as they possibly wanted to. Or, Facebook Marketplace or whatever, wherever they were selling it. And so traditional e-commerce companies don't, yes, they have supply and demand, and yes, sometimes demand goes up, but they don't have the same issues as marketplaces do with volatility because the pricing doesn't change, right?
The volume might, right?
The
Like, and that's
volume will for sure. Yeah.
so if you're thinking about it from a perspective like, you know, as we know, fraud prevention and fraud alerting isn't one-sided on like just price, right? And
Right.
so,
Oh, 100%.
you know, if you know, you're sitting there one day and suddenly, you know, if this is the normal aspect of paper towels that get sold on your online, you know, place, and then suddenly in the last hour,
Mhm.
your traditional thought process would be like something is happening that's wrong, right? Someone is just clearing us out of this, and
Mm.
a lot of people who might rush to like think, oh, it's a fraud ring, shut it down. But that's
Right,
where
right.
where it requires the need and understanding of in working with either internal tooling if that's what you're using, or your vendor if that's what you're using, of
Mhm.
is this expected? And what are the signs that are there? Are there true signs to show that this is unexpected activity?
Mhm.
Or is this, if all of it looks legitimate, again, maybe there is a response that's happening to, you know, a situation that you want to allow to have happen. But again, in the end, it's also related to the policy, right? Like, you know, maybe it's maybe there is a volatility event that's happening, but it's one person with a bot that's grabbing all of what you have. Is that what you would want to happen? Probably not.
Right.
It's all about like balancing out policy with playbooks and making sure that
Hmm.
you know, you work these scenarios and these potential events and, you know, simulations to understand what can happen and what would you like to have happen in these situations. So
Mhm.
uh, yeah, it, it it's tough like thinking through these, but again, they happen. And so my feedback has always been to prepare the best that you can to be able to be in a position to make smart decisions as they come, but then be flexible to, um, uh, you know, adjust to whatever is happening, but to be guided smartly by what you've seen in the past.
Right. Right. I think that's where experience comes into play because I've worked with merchants in the past that haven't had somebody that knows fraud and has been in fraud for, other companies or for a long time and talked to their peers and, that type of thing. And if you have someone new overseeing fraud or you have a VP of ops or something like that who's kind of overseeing it, they don't have the foresight to know, oh, okay, if this happens, this is what's going to happen. Like understanding cause and effect, understanding that, okay, if there's a giant pandemic again, we need to stock up on toilet paper and we need to understand that people might be buying, 10 cases, whereas we used to just see, one package per person.
Limit two per customer.
Yes, exactly. Then you start putting in your policies of 2 per customer. But then, the other thing that I've seen and that makes me laugh, I can think of the exact merchant it was, but there are merchants that offer really good, their marketing department decides, "Hey, we're gonna say if somebody buys this video game, they get a $20 gift card for a future purchase." Right? That's gonna totally impact it's gonna change good customer behavior, but it's also gonna change bad customer behavior, and those of us who have been in this industry long enough and seen that time and time again or talked with our peers and heard about it enough, we are able to tell, leadership when marketing comes and goes, "Hey, we've got this great idea," or something that you can actually you can influence before it happens. It's maybe not in the market, it's internally, because sometimes you can create it, yourself. But to be able to say, "Hey, just a heads up, if you do that, here's what's going to happen," right? We're going to see a lot of buyer fraud. We're going to see a lot of stolen credit cards to get those gift cards to then combine them all and sell them off. Or, hey, we're going to see, going back to the World Cup example, if USA wins their first game, we're probably going to see the second game tickets go up quite significantly. And here's what's going to happen, and be able to advise leadership. Now, leadership isn't always going to want to hear it, just from my own personal experience, but it's important that, those of us that have been around a while do issue words of caution and be able to control what you can control.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think, my advice there, my thoughts on that would be try to be, merchants or people that work on the side that we do, to try to be most of the time a guide and not a roadblock, and really
Yeah.
understanding the, think through the larger aspect of, say, one of those examples, right? What is the goal of the company or of leadership at that time, and what can you do or we do as people that sit in this chair to help get there, right? How can we, like, instead of, oh, that's a bad promo or a bad release, here's how it's going to hit us, it's more like, all right, cool, good idea.
Mhm.
Here's what some of the things we're going to tweak on our side just to make sure we can maximize that, because whether it's marketing or growth or yeah,
Mm.
biz dev, no one's out there trying to lose the money. They just might not know of some
That's
of the
true.
things of they could be getting that we could, you could get hit by. And so it's a
Right.
standpoint, advise on some of these areas and then tune where you can with, again, the goal at your business is to make money and
Yeah.
to be, try to be profitable and, make sure you're serving your customers the best way. And so again, in those scenarios, you definitely have to protect them. But my advice is always do it in the spirit of collaboration and advisement, and then, pick your battles because there's going to be a time where you're gonna be like, that is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And here is why. And it is so important to show that and to
Mhm.
make that case, but to pick those scenarios, like, don't be an alarmist. Don't say that's a terrible idea every single time.
Yes. Oh my
The the
gosh, yeah.
the decisions just don't the thoughts don't come to you, the decisions don't come your way, the information doesn't come. You find
That's
out
right.
when thing has launched and you're
Yep.
dealing with the aftermath.
The
And
fallout.
so
Yep.
I always try to advise people to think about it in the spirit of collaboration there with, whether it's your growth team, your marketing team, your biz dev team, whatever the case
Mhm.
is, that you're working with. Try to do it in the spirit of collaboration and understanding that you're both trying to achieve the same goal. Like, you want healthy growth, and that's always the way to put, like, here's how I can help drive healthy growth.
Mhm. Mhm.
Minimize that which is gonna be a drag to whatever promo it is that's happening. And so,
Mhm.
always the recommendation I make is partner with those teams, coming at it with a point of, believing in positive intent, because it's usually what there is.
Right.
There's positive intent there. You might just have to help tweak things just a little bit to make sure that positive intent turns into positive result.
Very well said, and I'm glad that you said that, because that is true. We need to balance it. I learned early on in my career that if you say no to everything, to your point, you stop getting invited to meetings and you find out about the promos at the same time as the customers. That really kicks me in the butt when my CMO decided to put the entire website 40% off on the day of Thanksgiving. And I didn't find out about it until the email went out to customers. And I mean, this was almost 20 years ago. So we didn't have the technology that we have now. I was manually pushing orders through all day on Thanksgiving and not spending time with my family. And I was like, okay, maybe I should try to change my approach. And at the next role I was in, I tried to say, okay, I understand that and that makes sense. We need to build revenue, etc. But here's what I anticipate happening, and here's what we're gonna do to try to mitigate those risks, while also making sure that they understand that your main goal is healthy growth, as you said. Not just growth, but the healthy kind. Um, because, I used to remind my teams when I worked on the front lines that the fraudsters don't pay your paychecks. The good customers do. So, and the good customers pay your bonuses too. So, uh, it's important to balance those and to make sure that those other teams understand that that's your priority.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something to be said for saying, hey, here's what I anticipate happening if you do that. And without saying no, just here's what I think is going to happen. Here's what we can do on our end. Or, hey, could we change that promo up a little bit and limit it one to a customer? Or can we, do this or that or whatever? Is there room for tweaking it a little bit? Because I do think that you earn credibility when what you say is going to happen happens.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've found is it's best to try to create, I call it the trust center of excellence, and basically you get together in your company with a set of leaders in areas that would affect trust, and make sure you're all in lockstep along the way and understanding what's going on, whether it's fraud, infosec, asset protection, product engineering, customer support, account management, if that's what you've got, or whether it's your growth team, whatever, in some your marketing side, so
finance,
that you understand those aspects. Like they're so much more intertwined than a lot of people understand, and things that impact one side send the shockwaves in and impact everybody else. But when you're on the same page, things are so much easier when you're running promotions or with volatility events or customer issues, right? Like you get those, a leader from each one of those all together to have, however regular syncs make sense, and understanding what are some of the things that are happening, and making sure that you can, from there, it also helps you influence roadmaps and understand what are the priorities that you want coming up, whether it's on your quarterly readiness planning or what's coming up with your engineering teams. As you work through those, that's just such an important aspect. And when you're all working together collaboratively on that, then you get to influence a little bit more.
Right.
If you're doing it right, then your input is heard, and you also know what's going. Maybe you don't need your input heard every time, or you know what's happening, and you can adjust and make sure that things are in place, so that, you've got a promotion that's about to run targeting, say, Mexico. All right, cool. Now I work with my vendor to talk about the strategy we should have for Mexico, because there's going to be a pop that is happening on traffic there, and don't see it as risky, or whether it's
as
Canada, whatever form. Now you've talked with and planned for, because you know what's happening. And so those are just tricks that I've used over the time that have really helped positively influence areas that can really, at times, if you're not prepared, be a drag on the business, which no one wants.
Right. That's a good point. And you're right. No one wants that. You have to assume good intent on their side. I think sometimes when fraud leaders are venting, it's clear that they aren't assuming best intentions from other departments. They're like, "Oh, marketing's trying to sabotage us." I'm like, "Well, do you really think they want fraud, or they're focused on their metrics, and their metrics are getting people through the door, and that's all they're thinking about. They're not thinking about, are we going to keep that money in 90 days? That's not their metric."
It's easy for us to get really cynical. I mean, like, I'm an above average cynical guy, but like, it's easy for us to like get like that, or get jaded, because we work with like forgive the term, we work with the shittiest of the shit most of the time. Mm, but, like, it's and when you sit there and you work with it all the time, every time, again, it's easy to get jaded because you see it like
See
that.
it all the time. Yep.
Like, when you sit there and all you work with is people who don't have positive intent, it's really easy to think that no one has positive intent.
That's a
And
good
and
point.
and that's why it's so important to, like, separate out
Mm.
what you do as your part of the business versus what the business is doing with you in it. And like
Mhm.
that is just a very critical thing to separate out and be like it's up to us to be that balance on
Right.
understanding those because like if you can make it work for you, it's very good because it also services like working in the shittiest of the shit, you get all the good stories. And
Yeah.
storytelling is such a big part of roadmap development
Mhm.
and driving
Policy work too.
releases and policy up exactly. Like you can come back with here are the examples. Here's the story on it. Here's how it impacted our customers and our real life users. And that is what helps, again, get policies adopted, get them built out, get the roadmap influence that, plus the data side as to here's the story and here's
Mm.
how much is happening. It can't just be a good storyteller with one off because then everybody thinks it's a one off. You have to have a good story and then be able to say, and that's one example. It happened 75 other times, and here's the examples of like, here's the numbers on them. Here's how much it impacted us.
Right. You have to quantify your stories.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was another mistake I made early on in my career was, taking the craziest outlandish story and sharing it and not intentionally, but making it seem like every kind of fraud was like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
no. So you have to back it up with 40% of the time it's this and 10% of the time it's that. Just because it's a good story, you have to back it up with data or else it's just a story, right? It's just and then your credibility gets shot when they're like, well, yeah, tells all these stories, but like, I don't know how often that happens. Those are probably just one offs.
Yeah. Yep. It can either seem like it's a one off if you don't explain and show how much it's happening, or
Or it
again,
could seem like
it's just
all of
you're
them.
you're a good storyteller and that happened once, and then like, hey, thanks for letting us know. We'll think about that and we'll get to it eventually. And
Right.
maybe it's on the roadmap, but it's backlogged, and so
Mm-hmm.
about making sure that you can tell the story and have the data to back up the amount that's happening so that you can influence the way you need to and the way you can help
The
uh,
resources you need.
keep the business moving. But again, it's a balance. You also can't, if you're sitting there working on the roadmap with your product people and you're looking at what's the stack ranking, it's important to try to be not like as non-biased and thinking about the business as much as possible. So if you're like, yeah, this only happened a couple of times, we don't need to move it to the top of the list compared to these things which are like mission critical. But again,
Yes.
then knowing when to use that and play that card of like, this is a big problem and we
Yes.
really need that up here. Right. So
Right,
it's
right.
about
Yeah.
it's it's a bit of a you call it political maneuvering, if you will, and that
Mm-hmm.
exists in every company. And you have to know when to use your capital and when to save it. And
Yeah.
that's a tough thing to get on. But I would kind of advise everybody that's listening on this to think of it from a standpoint of try to look at it with not an unbiased mind because like that's really hard for us to do, but
Mm-hmm.
really think about it from a standpoint of where do we need this to be? What is the impact on it? And then quantify
Right.
it. Don't treat it as like, well, I think. Show it as
Mm.
here is how much it's impacting and here's the value of it compared to that initiative. Because then you can say
Yes.
this initiative drives better impact than that initiative. And when you're speaking apples to apples on the product side, that's how you get items moving forward on the roadmap.
Hmm. Very sage advice, and I know that from experience as well. Choosing your battles, and I think it's also about building your own brand trust in a way. We talked about the importance of brand trust for marketplaces, but it's really important to build your own trust and be strategic in where you say, okay, we can deal with this the way it is. Like, this doesn't have as big of an impact, or this, I understand reprioritizing the roadmap and that, this is going to have to wait. However, like, this is the thing that we really need to focus on because of, where things are headed or what's, impacting us now and that type of thing. So very sage advice. I'm glad that we took a little bit of a turn or a slight right in the conversation to talk about that because it is so important. And I think that we as fraud professionals, you're right, we look at this shit all day, and when you are looking at everyone that has bad intentions and, looking at every transaction that has bad intentions and talking about that all day, you kind of start to assume that everyone has bad intentions internally as well.
Yep. Yeah, but
So
that's it. It's an easy pitfall to fall
it
into.
is.
It's important that we do our best to stay out of that.
I agree. It really is. It's an important lesson for all of us to learn. I think uh, that's going to be helpful for our industry in the future. And I've seen it happen already where, we've got new startups coming up and they're actually starting to have trust and safety departments before they, the chargebacks roll in, whereas it used to be. And, my story is similar to yours as well. Fraud department isn't created until chargebacks are in, and the company's losing money. Companies are starting to say, yeah, this is important. We need this. But it is good to have balance in everything that you do, right? Just like you need to balance your approvals and your declines, you need to balance you need to be intentional and balance your interpersonal relationships internally as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So one last question. You've recently left your position at StockX. What are you doing now and what are you thinking about for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I left. My last day at StockX was about a month ago now, and since then, I have been doing a lot of recharging. Right at the beginning, as I mentioned, I went out to Los Angeles for a week with my wife to catch the U.S. game against Paraguay. That was awesome. Like that was a tremendous way to both recharge and then go absolutely nuts during the match.
I bet.
Hitting both sides of that. And then after that, I came back and I didn't focus much on LinkedIn or what I was thinking next right away. I've been going to Northern Michigan a lot with my daughters and my wife and like spending time on the lake and actually enjoying summer. I haven't really been unemployed since I was like 17, because there was college, and then in the summertime I did an internship every summer, and then after I graduated I was hired right into my career at the time, and I worked in hotel operations for a long time, and as soon as I left that, I went straight into StockX. Like I moved across the country and went straight into StockX like a week and a half later. And so, in my entire career, I haven't had a time where I've been in between jobs. I worked for StockX for 9 years, and before that, I was with Ritz-Carlton and Marriott, the same company, for the time before that, all straight through. And so I just really haven't taken a break. And so
Yeah.
I am spending the beginning of this time, I've just been, recharging, spending time with the family. And it was really hard to like get in the mindset of that because I'm always just like, what's next? What am I doing? And the nice thing is like, it's not, you don't go with it like, oh, I'm either paying attention to what I'm doing next or I'm not, and nothing is happening. While I was in Los Angeles and then while I was up at the lake, like, people that are in my network were sending people my direction, like, oh, because people talk in our industry, like everybody that's listening to this, I think knows that our industry is both wide and small. Like this is
Mhm.
a lot of people know a lot of people, and it's a smaller industry. And if you can get a good reputation built and you can get a good network built, people will be working, at times for you. And so there were a lot that were reaching out to me like, hey, I talked to this person, or I talked to this person, I talked to this person, they said that we should get in touch, like there might be something coming up for later in the summer, let's just have an intro meeting. And then you'll have recruiters that somebody might send your way, because that's one of the things that I found is like I really appreciate my network and the people that have come to me, and I appreciate the people that had spoken on my behalf. Like it means the world to me that people are saying, hey, you should talk to Porteous and here's why. And so, I absolutely appreciate it. And for those of you in this situation, like if you're thinking about making a change, like I want to start thinking about what's next, it's terrifying. It absolutely is. But again, it's not just I'm either looking for my next role and it's happening, or if I'm not, nothing is happening. There is an aspect that you can be unplugging for a little bit and find it totally fulfilling and recharging. And that's really important, because again, taking a little bit of a pause in what we do is really important, because as I mentioned, we deal with the shittiest of the shit, and
Me too.
it can be totally draining. And
And it
and
can be more than 40 hours a week
100%.
very easily.
Absolutely. When a fraud ring starts busting through at like 3 a.m. Eastern time,
Mhm.
and it's blowing up all your, um, your reporting.
Alerts.
You're not just
Mhm.
sleeping through that. So, it can be draining, and so it really is important to take a little time, which I've been doing. And again, like I just had never done that before, so it's a little bit. I mean, I'll be honest in saying, like, at times it's terrifying. I'm like, am I doing enough? Am I not? But last week I started getting more involved with it. I don't know when this is going to air, but right now it's a couple of days before the 4th, and so after this, I'm going right back to Lake and gonna enjoy the holiday. But when I get back next week, again, I'm getting back to it pretty aggressively at that point. But
Mhm.
by now, I've been able to take weeks to I've got a 2 and a 4-year-old girls, and like I have so much fun with them. And like I that doesn't always happen if you get caught, like some fraud ring hits on the weekend, and like you're working on the weekend, and
Yeah.
things that I've missed along the way, that this has been really awesome to just get some time with the family.
Mm.
And so it is important to have that aspect of like recharge when you need to. And I mean this also of like those that you're not unemployed, but you're like, oh my gosh, I can never take a vacation, we're so busy. Like,
Right.
take a vacation. It's so necessary. Like
Mm.
recharge when you can, because what we do is really draining.
Mhm.
And what we see all day is really draining. Like we just got done talking about that aspect of like e-commerce. That doesn't even include like as you get into trust and safety and content moderation, and like what
Right.
see and hear and stuff like that all day. Like
Hmm.
our whole ecosystem is very draining. And so
Mhm.
take time to recharge when you can. And that's what I've been doing. So like that's like I don't know what I've been doing. What am I
Yeah.
looking for next?
Yeah.
Open to it. I've been taking meetings and working through kind of what I want to do next. And I'm still working through like, hey, do I want to stay with what I've been doing? Do I want to go this route? Do I want to go that route? I'm kind of working through all of that right now. And like I said, I've been taking a lot of meetings with a lot of different types of companies to see what's the best fit. But more than anything, I'm looking at it from a standpoint of what is the company fit and what's the
Mm.
role fit, and making sure that it meets with what I want to do, and what I think is something, and not just what can I do, what do I want to do, and what can I bring. It's also, how can I improve with the
Mm.
direction of the company? Because I don't want to just go somewhere, and none of us should be doing this, like just go somewhere to be another spoke in the wheel. You should go somewhere where you can really have an impact and bring something to the table. And so
Mhm.
That's kind of how I'm approaching it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's great. And I will include a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes for this episode. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, book one of those meetings, I will make sure that happens so they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. Mark, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that we made it happen.
I'm so happy to have been on. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate your patience all this time waiting to be able to join on. Additionally, by the time this airs, I'm hoping that will be, it'll have resulted in a U.S. win. So,
Right.
Go USA tonight and hopefully make it happen. But thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming. All right. I will talk to everyone else next week.